The flight was boarding smoothly until a flight attendant suddenly stopped beside a young boy sitting quietly in first class. Her sharp eyes narrowed as she assessed him. "Where is your guardian?" she demanded. "This seat isn't for you." The boy tightened his grip on his stuffed airplane, his small hands trembling. Before he could get a word out, she reached down and grabbed his arm, shoving him back into his seat with unnecessary force. A few passengers glanced up from their books and devices, but quickly looked away. No one said a word. No one helped him. She thought he was just another kid who had wandered into the wrong part of the plane. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that the boy was the son of the airline's owner. And by the time this flight landed, she wouldn't just lose her job. She would lose everything. The quiet hum of the engines filled the cabin as passengers settled into their seats. Among them was a small boy named Liam. His legs dangled slightly above the floor as he adjusted himself in the plush first-class chair. He clutched a worn, stuffed airplane in his hands, pressing it tightly against his chest. His breathing was uneven. His fingers twitched as he struggled to calm himself. Flying always made him nervous, not because he feared planes, but because sitting for long periods made his muscles stiff. Moving his body often took more effort than most people realized. Still, he was excited. It was his first time flying alone. His father had promised him everything would be fine. He just had to sit quietly, follow the rules, and enjoy the ride. Liam reached for his seatbelt, fumbling slightly. His fingers weren't quick enough. Frustration built in his chest. His body ached from stiffness. He let out a small, frustrated whimper. The sound had barely escaped his lips when a shadow loomed over him. "Excuse me," came a sharp voice. "You need to sit still." Liam flinched. Standing beside him was a tall woman in a crisp navy blue uniform. Her name badge read MS. Halston. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her sharp eyes swept over him from head to toe. Her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. MS. Halston had been a flight attendant for over 15 years. She took pride in keeping first class orderly and refined. And in her mind, this boy didn't belong. "You need to sit still," she repeated, her voice clipped. "And put that toy away. First-class passengers don't carry stuffed animals." Liam's fingers curled protectively around the soft airplane. He looked up at her, his lips parting as if to speak, but nothing came out. He struggled to get words out when he was overwhelmed. Under her piercing gaze, it felt impossible. MS. Halston sighed dramatically and rolled her eyes. Without warning, she grabbed his arm and shoved him back against the seat. "I said sit still," she snapped, her tone cold. "You're making a scene." Liam gasped softly, his body stiffening from the sudden force. Some passengers glanced over, their eyes flickering between the flight attendant and the boy. A few looked uncomfortable, but quickly turned back to their books or screens. Others didn't look at all. Tears welled up in Liam's eyes. His breathing was ragged as he shrank into his seat. He wanted to tell her he was trying, that his legs hurt, that he wasn't making a scene on purpose. But the words tangled in his throat. His small fingers trembled as he reached for his tablet. His dad had told him that if anything went wrong, he should send a message. With shaking hands, Liam tapped the voice message icon. "Daddy, the lady hurt my arm. She said I can't be here. I want to go home." He pressed send, his chest aching, not just from fear, but from something deeper. That feeling of being unwanted, of being seen as a problem instead of a person. MS. Halston stood back up and smoothed her uniform like nothing had happened. She had no idea the message had already been delivered. She had no idea that, in just a few minutes, everything was about to change. Thousands of miles away, in his office in Chicago, Griffin Hale finished a business call. His phone vibrated on his desk. His pulse jumped when he saw who it was from. Liam rarely messaged during flights. Griffin swiped to play the message. The moment his son's shaky voice played, his entire body stiffened. "Daddy, the lady hurt my arm. She said I can't be here. I want to go home." Silence filled the room. Griffin clenched his jaw and played it again. His son had been crying. He could hear the tremble in his voice, the struggle to get the words out. Griffin pressed a button on his desk phone. "Lena," he said calmly, though his voice carried an unmistakable sharpness. "I need flight information for Liam's trip. Right now." "Yes, mister." "Hale," his assistant answered swiftly. Griffin tapped his fingers against the polished wood of his desk, his mind racing. Someone had hurt his son, made him feel like he didn't belong. And whoever it was had no idea who Liam was or who Griffin Hale was. A new email arrived moments later. Flight 482, First Class, Senior Flight Attendant, Halston Meredith. He memorized the name instantly. "Lena," he said again, "get me in touch with the captain of Flight 482. "Yes, mister." "Hale." 5 minutes. Griffin exhaled slowly. He was a patient man, but when it came to his son, there were no second chances. Meanwhile, back on the plane, a mess. Halston continued moving through the first-class cabin, checking on other passengers as if nothing had happened. She smirked faintly when she noticed Liam had finally quieted down. She had dealt with plenty of unruly passengers before, entitled people who thought they deserved better than they got. She wasn't about to cater to a restless boy. At the front of the cabin, another flight attendant, Tara, watched everything with unease. Tara had been with the airline just over a year. She knew speaking out against someone like MS. Halston wasn't easy, but something about what had just happened didn't sit right. She approached MS. "Halston, quietly. Was that really necessary?" Tara asked. MS. Halston barely glanced at her. "He was causing a disturbance." "He's just a kid," Tara replied. "And did you see his hands? I think he struggles to move them." MS. Halston scoffed. "Then he shouldn't be flying alone in first class." Tara's stomach twisted. She wanted to argue. But before she could, an announcement came over the intercom. "Senior Attendant Halston, please report to the cockpit." MS. Halston frowned, but walked briskly toward the front of the plane. Tara watched her go, her gut telling her something big was about to happen. MS. Halston stepped into the cockpit and found Captain Reynolds standing by the control panel. His expression was unreadable. "Is she there?" a voice asked through the in-flight phone. Captain Reynolds nodded. "Yes, sir. Senior Attendant Halston is here." The voice continued, deep and controlled. "This is Griffin Hale." MS. Halston's heart skipped. She knew that name. The Griffin Hale, founder and owner of Helix Air, her boss, and Liam's father. "I want an explanation," Griffin said. His voice was razor-sharp. Captain Reynolds crossed his arms. "We received a complaint from Mr. Hale about his son. Would you like to explain why a first-class passenger, a child, was physically handled by my crew?" MS. Halston's mouth went dry. "Captain, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. The boy was disruptive. I simply corrected his behavior." "You shoved him," Griffin interrupted. "A disabled child." I didn't mean." "I heard his voice," Griffin said, his tone deadly calm. "He told me what you did." Captain Reynolds shook his head. "You'll be removed from duty as soon as we land. And you will apologize to my son," Griffin added. "Personally. Then you'll be escorted for questioning by the airline board." MS. Halston's face paled. This was escalating too fast. "Sir, please." But the line clicked off. Captain Reynolds gestured toward the door. "Now." Back in first class, MS. Halston returned to Liam's seat. She cleared her throat, but her usual commanding presence was gone. "Liam," she began stiffly. "There's been a misunderstanding." He looked at her, expression unreadable. "You're saying it was a misunderstanding?" he repeated softly. "Yes," she replied, struggling for words. "An error in judgment." Liam tilted his head. "You saw my ticket. You still told me to move. I misjudged the situation." Liam picked up his tablet and tapped the voice message icon. "Daddy, she's asking me to go back now. What should I do?" The response came quickly. "Take your time," Griffin's deep voice said. "Make her understand what she did." Passengers around them had begun paying attention now. MS. Halston felt her control slipping further away. "Why did you think I didn't belong here?" Liam asked. MS. Halston froze. Passengers turned their heads to listen. "You didn't ask anyone else for their ticket," Liam said quietly. "Just me." What? MS. Halston's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because I'm different? Liam continued softly. Because you thought I didn't belong? MS. Halston swallowed hard. I made a mistake. You shoved me, Liam said. I shouldn't have done that, MS. Halston admitted quietly. I was impatient, and I was wrong. Liam studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, he said softly. Now you know. Tara stepped forward, guiding Liam back to his seat. As they passed, Liam looked back one last time. Next time, he said quietly, don't just see what you expect to see. And by the time Flight 482 landed, Meredith Halston was no longer an employee of Helix Air. She walked off the plane, surrounded by security, her career in ruins. Passengers whispered, crew members stared, and standing in the terminal, watching it all unfold, was Griffin Hale, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder. You okay? Griffin asked Liam quietly. Liam nodded. I am now. And together they walked away,